And it's not, why wouldn't you do that? It's not costing you anything, costing the insurance company, and they just, that stuff stacks up.
Anybody need a nebulizer?
Or a wheelchair,
Or a electric scooter, never open.
oh, really? Are you serious?
I'm serious.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We're having good discussions about sleep, maybe. Good to see you all here this morning. We are nearing the end of Jesus' public ministry in our journey through the path. And I believe that we are going to be reading the chapter proclaiming the good news of the kingdom from the transfiguration until the end.
237,
What's that?
237.
Beginning on page 237. So just a quick overview of where we have been recently. We have we've been following Jesus throughout his public ministry. We've been reading a sort of homogenized version of the Gospels. All four Gospels are kind of combined into one narrative. You've heard me say before that this is, I can see why they did this here, but it's also kind of a dangerous way to read the Gospels in many regards because they are so deliberately different. I think it's Jane Walton who likes to say, "Thou shalt not homogenize." Is that right? Is that a Jane Walton?
Like a shade wall.
Reader's Digest version.
Yeah. So an example, I suppose, might be from today's gospel text, which is the parable of the wise and the foolish maidens with the flask of oil and the lamps. That is just textbook Matthew. You should immediately spot that as being from Matthew's gospel. The kind of parable that often ends with people being thrown into the outer darkness where they're weeping and gnashing of teeth, right? And
Ooh, this.
Wilson, take this chair from here.
Nothing like having brass plates over for.
oh, God.
You can even check.
Don't worry about it. Tony, do you want me to get that other chair? for you?
No, I'm fine.
Oh, you always said that chair.
Yes, Wilson and Bob qualify for having their own seats. So
As you get older, you forget things, so you forget people's names, but if they sit in the same seat, you kind of know who they are.
okay.
That's the trick.
Another thing about some of these gospels, these parables from the Gospel of Matthew, is that almost all of the Gospel of Matthew is to be read and referenced back to the Sermon on the Mount. That's just the way that the Gospel of Matthew. So again, it's just kind of a caution about reading the four Gospels together as if they are one, the same story, because they're really kind of not. They differ from each other in many important ways. That said, we have been following Jesus through his public ministry, his baptism. We spent some time discussing the parables and kind of the function that they play in each of the synoptic gospels. They are not found in John's gospel. John has instead I am statements in which Jesus speaks in metaphorical terms, saying, I am the good shepherd, I am the gate, things like that. Jesus has been healing and proclaiming that the kingdom of God is at hand, and now he is heading towards Jerusalem. And really in all of the Gospels, I think I'd have to go back and look a little bit more carefully, but when Jesus heads back towards Jerusalem, this is kind of set up as a showdown, right? Jesus is speaking out a great deal against, specifically against the religious leaders of his day. That Jewish leadership is centered at the temple in Jerusalem. So Jesus has been saying a lot of not very generous things about those who are leading the people of Israel. And now we all know that when he heads to Jerusalem, something's going to happen. We're not expecting this to end well. And you'll also notice, and you'll hear this in some of the parables, especially in Matthew. When Jesus arrives in Jerusalem, his rhetoric really kind of amps up, because now he's really directly in the presence of those against whom his movement is kind of directed. It's sort of especially as he's portrayed in the Synoptic Gospels, he's not trying to start a new religion. He is a covenant renewer within, in the Jewish tradition of people like Moses. And so that is the way that he is sort of portrayed in the Synoptic Gospels. And so and so now here he is in Jerusalem, and now you're going to really start hearing a lot of the parables that are going to end in weeping and gnashing of teeth, punishment and of judgment. So those against whom he has come to proclaim judgment, he's now in their presence. So any questions about any of kind of where we've been in the chapters leading up to where we are today? Or any thoughts?
I think when we started this out, you were talking about the four gospels, and you said they're written from a different perspective, each one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't, could you go back over and say, like Matthew, I think, has anti-Semitic tendencies through it, is that correct?
Not anti-Semitic, but Matthew is probably the most critical of the temple leadership.
Okay.
So Matthew has very harsh rhetoric against the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the chief priests. So you're gonna hear that a great deal.
And the other, you characterize the other gospels also in a sort of a general manner, seems like.
Mark's gospel generally, and these are broad kind of characterizations that I'm making, but Mark is going to, Jesus is less concerned about his identity than he is probably in any of the other gospels. Mark, Jesus says over and over again, follow me, follow me, follow me. So he's not really talking about who he is. Mark moves very quickly through Jesus' life. Jesus, in the end, is forsaken and betrayed by all of his followers. The gospel ends at the empty tomb. There's no resurrection story. And so, well, there's a resurrection, but it's only, Jesus never appears to his disciples. All you get at the end of Mark's gospel is it's short. It is believed to be the oldest of the written gospels that we have. I'd say it's my favorite by far. I love the Gospel of Mark. It's very kind of mysterious. Doesn't give any easy answers. And in the end, what I find most appealing about Jesus is the way that he lived his life and what he taught. People argue about who he was he the Son of God? Was he this? What did his life mean? The thing that is compelling to me about Jesus is that when I read about his life, I think to myself, I want to follow that guy. I don't care about any of that other stuff. I'll follow him. That's a very Markan theme. Luke is very concerned with wealth. When you hear Jesus condemning those who have money, you're probably reading the Gospel of Luke. Luke is very distrustful of wealth and of just power and prestige in general. And then John, of course, is completely different. It's its own it's its own creature. Whereas the synoptic gospels, Jesus tends to point to the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven. In John, Jesus points to himself usually. And it's Jesus' identity as the Son of God that is the central message to John's gospel. John is also considered to be, in many regards, one of the most kind of anti-Jewish of all of the gospels. That's kind of a misreading of John's gospel. That gospel is believed to have been written within a community at a time when there was increasing division between two branches of Judaism, one which led to rabbinic Judaism and one which led to Christianity. But at the time, Christians were still regarded themselves as Jewish people, right? And so there was increasing conflict. In the Greek text, Jesus, well, in the other gospels, when Jesus seems to be delivering harsh rhetoric against the Jewish people, it's always against the Jewish leaders. So it's against the temple leadership, it's against the Pharisees. In John, the Greek word that is used is just the Judeans, which has been translated into English in the past as the Jews. So Jesus isn't condemning the Jewish leaders. He's condemning, or appears to be condemning, the Jews. Again, I think that's a bit of a misunderstanding of the kind of the intent behind the Gospel of John. But it all depends on how you want to read it, I suppose.
Let's go. Thank you.
That's a lengthy answer to your question.
Oh, that's what I wanted.
Any questions about any of that? Yeah, well,
This is just a very simple question. What, and in the temple leadership, the Pharisees and Sadducees, and the rabbis did this more generic kind of thing to teach correct. But furthermore, within the Jewish church at that time, the Pharisees,
The Sadducees were more rooted in the kind of elite ruling class of Judaism at the time. So they were more closely associated with the temple leadership, with Jerusalem. The Pharisees, there may not have been many Pharisees around at the time of Jesus. The Pharisees were a renewal movement within Christianity, probably started, I think, somewhere around the time of Jesus. I have to go back and look at the timeline. By the time that the temple was destroyed after Jesus' life, the Pharisaic movement had really gained steam. The thing that was significant about the Pharisaic movement is that it placed emphasis on the Torah and living out the Torah rather than the temple worship, which required a temple, right? So in that temple, so there are kind of two branches of Judaism at the time. One which is centered on the Torah and kind of the ancient teachings of Judaism, and one which is centered on temple worship. So, not surprisingly, when the temple gets destroyed by the Romans, the ones who survive are going to be the Pharisees and the Christians, because neither of them is dependent upon that temple or proper worship. But yes, broadly speaking, at the time, the word rabbi simply was, I think, teacher is a pretty good translation of that word. So anybody who was regarded as a kind of a wise teacher of the Torah would have been addressed as rabbi. Anything else? I think she's just brushing away a mosquito. I don't think
I just wanted to ask which of the synoptic gospels is the longest?
Matthew, I think. Yeah, Matthew and Luke are both a little bit longer, but Matthew, I think, is the longer. And Matthew most strongly associates Jesus with Moses. You'll hear Jesus compared to Moses a great deal, as we would the very Jewish character of that gospel. Ellen?
This is a little bit of a non sequitur, I guess, but just in the context of Jesus being a rabbi. One Bible leader that I've heard discuss this in his life in a Bible study that I go to, talking about the context, the historical context of his life, and all of these great crowds that formed around him. She was implying that he really was kind of a well-known guy. He was a well-known rabbi. There were lots of people that went around being rabbis and teaching, and that they had groupies basically, and not just the disciples, but large numbers of people that just followed them around, not just Jesus, but other rabbis as groupies. And so these large crowds weren't necessarily all that spontaneous. A lot of them were kind of following him around all of the time. Would you kind of agree with that explanation?
Yes. Now, I'm not a scholar of that part of Christianity, really, but as I understand it, that is more or less the case. And there's in most of the Gospels, there is some sense of discomfort about the fact that Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, who was one such rabbi who had many followers. And now, why did Jesus have to go to him to be baptized? And now he started his own movement. Well, what happened there? This was a time of general unrest in the area and throughout the world, really. But they're under occupation by the Roman Empire, and they are one of the expectations for those areas that were under Roman occupation was that they worshiped Caesar. And this was really troubling, in particular for the Jews. I mean, you were not allowed to worship anybody, right, except Yahweh. And so there's a lot of unrest. There's a lot of kind of messianic movements that are ultimately trying to movements that have a political and military side to them. And so the Romans rightly regarded all of these rabbis as rabble rousers. They didn't put up with them. You can see what happens to people like Jesus and John the Baptist. And that was pretty typical.
Not too much has changed, hasn't
Probably not. Probably not.
it? Neil Collins and
Yeah. But the Romans were particularly ruthless. I mean, there is a reason that their empire was so successful. Reigned through terror. And crucifixion is a great example. They didn't just kill people, they hung them up in front of everybody. Just show them this is what happens when you try to lead a movement, Roman Empire. Any other questions? A good discussion. Questions or thoughts?
We're going to talk about the transfiguration.
Let's do it. What about it? What about the transfiguration? Grabs your attention, Bob.
I love this story, and there's some things about it that I put myself in the role of one of the disciples that was selected to go up the hill. And I'm thinking, that's not going to be good. He's got his favorite people, and I'm just not one of them. And then when they come down the hill, they've been told not to tell anybody anything. So where do I stand? I've been a disciple, and here I am being treated like just a plain old regular person. But the other thing is, in my text that I've always read, which I think looking back at the NIV version, God said at the baptism and at the transfiguration this is my son with whom I am well pleased, or this is my son whom I love. And the translation in this book is, this is my son, the beloved. And that's a different perspective than whom I love. Okay, if I say, and I don't know where else God says who Jesus is, this is my son and I love him. Listen to him. Because if you say this is my son, the beloved, that means that all y'all ought to love, which to me is a little different perspective. But I think saying to a crowd of people or to your son that you are my son and I love you is very important. And I've always thought, I've asked the question in classes, when's the last time you looked at your son or daughter and said, I love you because you're special? Or particularly where you introduce them to somebody and you say, this is my son, Jeff, whom I love. And what that does for Jeff, or what it does for Audrey or whatever, it reconfirms that you're special enough that I'm willing to tell everybody else that how much I love you. So that's always been my kind of perspective. And I think she kind of washes it out here. So I went back to look at the text. The NRSV, anglicized. I didn't know there was an anglicized NRBSA. Reads just like, oh, it does. If you Google up, verses, it'll come up with whatever the linkage is. And then you can go over and select which version to read, and it puts it there. But the NRSVA says, my beloved, the beloved, not my beloved, but the beloved. And which to me is a little different than saying, this is my son with whom I'm well pleased. So the way she printed it is exactly the way she used it, is exactly the way the NRSV is, I think.
Yes, it should be. Now, of course, the wording is a little bit different in each of the synoptics, I think. I don't remember if that exact proclamation differs. It may be the same. There are minor ways in which each of the synoptics.
Okay, but the baptism of Jesus is in Matthew.
Oh, you're talking about the baptism.
I'm comparing the two because it says the same thing. So if you look up Matthew 3, which is the baptism, and when the clouds part and the voice comes out, it says, according to NRSVA, this is my son, the beloved. If you go back to older text, other text, maybe NIV or whatever, it says, this is my son whom I love.
Isn't the transfiguration only in one gospel?
Well, and no, it's
in all three synoptics.
Is it on all?
but it's, if you use Matthew 17, which is his version, it's identical to the baptism in the same Bible. So maybe I'm just beating a dead horse.
Didn't God say that while Peter was talking? And and it seemed like God was telling him to shut up. When I read it, that's what I was saying. No, at the transfiguration.
Would be the first time Peter got it wrong.
Because he was going on, they were talking about, I'm gonna build this temple, he was talking, and it seemed like that message was.
I think one time earlier this year, I got sidetracked. I told Father David, I said, I need to sit down with you sometime because I never have understood the power of the transfiguration. He said, come on by, I never made it. So, we got you here today. Maybe the thing that is so powerful is it's the link between the Old Testament with these two real important figures, probably two of the most important. You have Moses and Elijah up there on the mountain, and God is, and when the big white vision appears, God's trying to tell somebody that this is it. You have the law that I've been trying to get through your head all this time, and then you've got this new path to salvation through Christ and, you know, these three. I think John probably got it.
But the only guys up there were Peter and John, right?
And James.
And James. Okay, so there was three of them. And then he told them not to tell anybody.
But
Somebody spilled the bean.
there, there's some behind that. But think of it, John and James and Peter are going to be the principal people that build this church, until all comes along. But James had a huge amount to do with it, and John eventually finishes it in the Gospel of John. The thing is, don't tell anything, buddy. That's been the theme all the way from the beginning. All these stories, all these miracles, and the temple had their spies out there. The Romans had their spies out there, and he's just trying to buy enough time. And then things change when he goes to Mary and Martha and raises Lazarus, and of course they were already gunning for him at that point. But like I say, I've never put the pieces together for the Transfiguration. And then in men's Bible study, Lee and Bob and I, we went through it again, and in the Revelation makes it very clear, Elijah and Moses are very much for, and they go back through it, and I read through that and I still don't understand the implications of it at all, but.
Well, I think the idea of don't tell anybody was because when you start telling something, you draw a crowd, and I think he had work to do that he wanted to. The other thing is, if you really want the word to get out, tell people not to tell each other. I mean, I'm serious.
Yeah. That's right. You're right. That's right.
And you all know this, I'm sure, but that theme is especially noticeable in the Gospel of Mark, the so-called messianic secret. There are numerous kind of rhetorical reasons to do that, probably, and you've discussed some of them. Another one is just that if you tell somebody, you know, well, you know, this is all a secret, but I'm telling you, that puts you in kind of a privileged position, right? And so I think there's that sense of making the people who are hearing this story feel like they are privileged to learn something that the world at large is not privy to. And yes, I mean, it very clearly in the synoptics, the Transfiguration bookends the baptism it is intended to. The baptism initiates Jesus' public ministry, and in a sense, the Transfiguration concludes that public ministry. And now we're moving to Jerusalem and the Passion narrative. And just as the baptism does reveal something about the nature of Jesus, so is the Transfiguration intended to do that. It is intended again to reveal Jesus, especially in Matthew. Remember, Matthew is portraying Jesus in the mold of Moses and as a covenant renewal. So Matthew brings us the Sermon on the Mount, right, which is intended to sort of be a retelling of Moses going up onto the mountain to receive the Torah and bring it back to the people. Now we've got the Transfiguration. Again, Jesus going up the mountain just as Moses did. Moses, when he came down from the mountain, you may recall that his face was shining, so he had it covered with a veil. So now we've got Jesus going up to the mountain, shining white, in the presence of Moses and Elijah. And so this is a connection to the Torah, and it is intended to portray Jesus in a sense as a covenant renewer.
Can I read?
I say, you know some stuff.
What?
You know some stuff from your studies and all those. That I didn't know about the connection between the Sermon on the Mount and the Transfiguration. That's great.
Yeah,
Or the connection back to Moses.
that's right. Yeah.
Can I read it? The Transfiguration scriptures?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it what translation?
Matthew.
Is this NRSV or
This is NIV.
NIV? Okay.
Okay. Then he was transfigured before them, his face shone like the sun, his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter, while he was still speaking, here in the middle of the transfigure, while he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them. Wait a minute, I missed part of it. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Right in the middle of it, Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Right in the middle of it. And then while he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, this is my son whom I love. With him who I am well pleased. Listen to him. I mean, Peter interrupts the whole thing. Right in the middle of it. I couldn't believe it. I mean,
And then wants to build 3 shelters.
well, yeah, he's talking about that while in the middle of it, while it's happening.
I think that's
Not-
what I do.
Not afterwards. I mean, you would think he'd wait till it was over, to talk about it, but he interrupts right in the middle of it.
Yeah, well. As Wilson alluded, I mean, Peter is portrayed really as a clueless buffoon.
Like most of us.
Yeah, exactly. We should be able to relate, hopefully. If there's hope for Peter, then there's hope for all of us.
I'm trying to put into context the gospel song, Go Tell It on the Mountain.
Oh, yeah, good.
Let's see how that kind of fits in with the whole narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, and if we were to be more scripturally true, I suppose we'd say, don't tell anybody. And don't go tell it on the mountain. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting stuff. And yeah, the Peter's response is certainly always really interesting. Clearly, he's missing the point. This story may relate in some ways to the destruction of the temple. He's trying to build a temple that is going to be a place of worship for Jesus. This may be an effort also to kind of contain Jesus up there on the mountain so that he doesn't go back into the world and, turn everything upside down. But when God shows up in the midst of all this, he doesn't say, and I think this is something you're alluding to, but he doesn't say, this is my son whom I love, worship him.
No.
Right?
No.
He says, listen to him.
Right.
So again, he's kind of focusing on Jesus' teachings rather than the person of Jesus himself. So that's one of the reasons that this story probably doesn't occur in the Gospel of John. This is not a very Johannine story. In John's Gospel, God would probably say, this is my son, the beloved, believe in him.
Yeah.
Any other questions or thoughts about the Transfiguration? We've got quite a few other stories in here. Claire wrote up a little thing inviting us to consider, I think, if one of these stories speaks to us in particular. Do any of y'all, or are there any of these? And these, by the way, are in many cases greatly shortened. The story of the healing of the man born blind in the Gospel of John, that story goes on forever and ever and ever. They've whittled it down to one short paragraph. But any thoughts about any of those stories or any favorites that you might have?
The raising of Lazarus, the part that got me was when Jesus drives home the point that he was human, and he knew if he saw her, like at some point in life.
Agreed. And this is particularly notable, I think, because it occurs in the Gospel of John, which portrays Jesus much more in terms of his divinity than the Gospels do. And so for John then to portray Jesus as weeping, really, in a sense, adds to the poignancy of this story.
Centurion servant. Sort of puzzled me a little bit. Here's a guy that's, a Roman, I guess.
Mhm.
Centurion.
Mhm.
And he says, I'm a man of authority, yeah. I can come to it. It's like, I'm pretty important.
Mhm.
But then he sort of casts it aside in a way. But he's in kind of like a backhand.
Yeah.
But I don't know that.
Yeah. But I think in this context, he is is confessional, I think. He begins by saying, I'm not worthy. So he's kind of saying, because of the authority that I have over others, and because I'm able to boss people around, that is the grounds for my unworthiness. And so that's,
I think my take on that is always been Jesus offers to go with him. He
Right.
says, no, don't do that, because that's gonna be a problem for both of us. If you come to my house, people are gonna see you there, and we really don't want you to be, if you do that, just heal my my, what was it, his daughter, soldier, or servant, anyway. And Jesus does that, but it's long distance. And I always said, if he actually, when he wasn't ready for this resurrection to happen, it happens in the Lazarus story, but here's okay. So anyway, that's my take on it. Jesus wasn't ready to really get in big trouble yet. So.
I'm probably reading too much into it, but I also saw this thing like Jesus saying, you understand me and what I'm dealing with. Because I have to deal with all these things in people.
yeah. And because the centurion does have power, I mean, he could have presumably said to Jesus, you're coming with me. And he does not do that. He approaches Jesus in a very different way.
I like the story of Zacchaeus.
Mhm.
I like it because it's sort of comical. Well, it is.
It is. Oh,
really
absolutely.
is.
Yeah.
Jesus finds a little man up in a tree,
Uh-huh.
and says, come down, I'm going to take you to my house.
Yeah.
And the little man is a tax collector, so that makes everyone raise their eyebrows about what is Jesus doing right now. The other thing I love about the Zacchaeus story is that little kids love it.
Mhm.
It's a great story for children.
Mhm.
So I like that very much. And the song.
Yeah, the song is great.
Yeah. It is. It's a good one.
I'm struck by this story about the Canaanite woman.
Mhm.
And what strikes me is that it shows the human side of Jesus. We always paint the picture of Jesus as the perfect and never could screw up. And I find it hard to identify with somebody like that.
Mhm.
So he screwed up a couple of times here, and that helps me, really. But I think what he's saying is, to begin with, she's a Canaanite, she's not a Jew. So, I didn't come here to take care of you. And then he tells her about the dogs eating the crumbs off the floor, and that's pretty much non-traditional Jesus thinking.
Yeah. I agree.
I think you've done a sermon on that. It was helpful.
I've done a couple.
Yeah.
I've used this story to call Jesus a racist
Right.
and to call him a hypocrite,
Right.
both of which he really kind of displayed. I mean,
And you call him that with love.
of course I do. And like you said, it's part of if you really read through the Gospel of John and really focus on the way Jesus is portrayed, it's kind of hard to relate to him. He does not come across as very human. And so I think it is helpful to feel like, okay, this is a guy who, in his own way, struggled the same as we all do. Helps us to, you know, to follow him as somebody who's not completely unattainable.
The woman caught in adultery, I've always liked that. It's like anyone among you is without sin, is grace common. I think that's really powerful. But I would try to be the same. That's state me a little bit.
I don't think anybody knows.
I don't think anybody does either, but to me, there's something human about that as well. I mean, there's just kind of doodling, you know, in the sand or whatever, just seems to me like a human thing to do.
All right, so that sort of explains it rather well.
And that's always been one of my favorite stories as well. And for a while, it was kind of spoiled for me a little bit when I learned, you know, probably in seminary or at some point, that that story is almost universally by biblical scholars believed to have been added to the Gospel of John. And if you look back at it, and you know, again, biblical scholars have looked at that story. There are a bunch of words that occur in that story that don't occur anywhere else in the Gospel of John. The language that is used is not consistent with the rest of the Gospel. And so for a while, that kind of ruined it for me. And then, you know, it occurred, you know, this is clear. All of these, what we call the Gospels, are based on oral traditions that were handed down and eventually somebody wrote them down. And I think we have every reason to believe that story, I mean, it's just true to who Jesus was. I mean, there's no reason to think that that was not an authentic story about Jesus that was handed down and was left out in the earliest writings that became the Gospel of John, but that made its way in later on. So
I think they did a great job of laying out everybody from the margins in the way they presented each of these stories in the back book. You have a woman caught in adultery, then you have a centurion, and he's a Gentile. He has no business even being in this Jewish story at all. Then you have the blind man and that story. So here's somebody that is sick, and then you have the Canaanite woman story where we talk about an outcast, and then this rich young man. I mean, he wants to be part of this, but he can't let go of his wealth. And then you get Zacchaeus, and you know, here's a tax collector, and everybody hates him. So all of these people are at the margins, and then the last one in here, the raising of Lazarus. Jesus is going to go to Jerusalem. I think they're part of his real family. I think they're blood kin. And I think that was a safe place for him to be. And the tears would be like for anybody that's lost a family member. And then he played, you know, and he purposely doesn't go. He needs to make sure Lazarus died, but he wept. And I mean that is a normal, fully human side of Jesus. And then I think he went there just because he needed that last comfort of his family who he loved dearly. And then Jerusalem isn't that far. And then on Palm Sunday, I guess he probably went to somewhere up there, maybe on the Mountain of Olives. I don't know if they directly went. And then you have the whole prophecy of Zechariah or coming out. He would ride to Jerusalem like a messianic figure on the back of a donkey. And I mean, then the whole passion story starts. I think they did a great job of laying out the essential stories. I love the path. It's a nice way to go back and reconnect the dots, so.
It's really well done. I agree.
It's interesting, you run that litany of, or list of stories. And they're all a little bit different and they all have something special about them. It's a pretty neat way to think about it.
Yeah, I had not really noticed the degree to which they chose stories in which Jesus did minister to the sinners, you know, the outcasts of his time, and those who were marginalized. That's a really good point. And certainly a very important theme in the Gospels, especially the Synoptics. Jesus is a boundary crosser. I mean, even the raising of Lazarus is kind of the ultimate boundary crossing. The dead would have been considered to be unclean at the time, and have any contact with them was to render yourself unclean. And Jesus crossed that boundary. Some boundaries he needed a little bit of help crossing, as with the Canaanite woman. But yeah, really an interesting aspect of these stories. I'd like to read something real quick, if I may, from the Book of Common Prayer. I've been doing lots of burials lately, unfortunately, but there's a little note in the Book of Common Prayer at the end of the burial rites that I think is very beautiful. And so this is one of the rubrics. This is basically something for us to know about the burial services. It says, note, the liturgy for the dead is an Easter liturgy. It finds all its meaning in the resurrection. Because Jesus was raised from the dead, we too shall be raised. The liturgy, therefore, is characterized by joy, in the certainty that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. This joy, however, does not make human grief unchristian. The very love we have for each other in Christ brings deep sorrow when we are parted by death. Jesus himself wept at the grave of his friend. So while we rejoice that one we love has entered into the nearer presence of our Lord, we sorrow in sympathy with those who mourn. Isn't that beautiful? It is.
So how would you find that? What,
Kind of at the very end, you know, you've got burial rite 1 and rite 2, and then the committal, I think. And then at the very end, after all that stuff, on page 506, there's an order for burial that just sort of describes the basic components of a burial service. And then in the next page, there's this rubric concerning the service.
and that's on pages, or those?
It's on, this is on page 507.
So the pages are consistent from
Yeah.
Yep.
507.
Yep.
I actually, when I have talked to friends who've attended an Episcopal memorial service or funeral who are not Episcopalian, I love telling them
Mhm.
that our service is basically Easter. And usually people are surprised.
Yeah. We have the paschal candle and the service is white. It's all about resurrection. It is an Easter celebration. And I've actually taken to printing this note in bulletins when we do a burial. Because I just think it provides really important context
It does.
for the service.
And it's beautifully written.
Yeah.
Just for grins, can you turn to Psalm 71 and read verse 18 for us?
Psalm 71. Verse 18. It's a favorite of mine. And now that I am old and gray-headed, O God, do not forsake me till I make known your strength to this generation and your power to all who are to come.
Oh, boy.
It's this room, doesn't
I smiled all week.
Some of us don't have hair to turn gray, but when we used to publish the Trinity Trumpet, a monthly kind of print publication newsletter, the kind of thing that churches don't really do anymore. We used to have kind of interviews with elderly parishioners to share their wisdom with the younger generations, and I think we called it something to this effect. Now that I'm old and gray-headed, to go back and look that up.
That's an old, often used phrase, and I didn't realize it was from the Psalms.
Mhm.
Now that I'm old and gray. I mean, everybody says that.
Yeah.
Dan, when Dan was here, she was calling around to people, asking what their favorite verse was, and then it was printed in the tidings. But it was kind of interesting to get different people's perspectives and reflecting their own lives.
Well, it's certainly a reminder of the importance of sharing our wisdom, and how now, no matter how old we get and how gray our hair turns, that role of passing on our faith to the younger generations is always one of our responsibilities.
If only they would listen.
If only that.
How come you get an eye roll from your grandchildren when you try to do that?
Bob, if I could answer that question.
At least you try to plant the seed.
You're talking about grandchildren. I'm talking about children.
Children.
It's,
You're smart that you don't have hair to pull out.
That's true. One of the benefits of parenting.
Grandchildren are so much better than children.
Yes.
Oh, I don't doubt it.
Did you roll your eyes
Never.
at your dad? Did you roll your eyes at your dad?
We would have gotten smacked upside the head.
That's right. No,
Maybe
no,
once.
Not really, he never touched us.
A lot of times we're rolling our eyes at them when they come up with some harebrained idea. I think it works both ways.
But you know what? That stuff gets under our skin, doesn't it? In spite of ourselves, we may not realize that our children, our grandchildren are internalizing some of this stuff, and they may act like we're irrelevant, and they,
I never give up.
Yeah.
Never give up.
yeah.
Maybe try another approach.
Well, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, Bob, but it's something you said publicly in one of our classes, and it has always stuck with me. And you probably don't remember this, but we had a class once about Asia. And we posed the question, what do you fear about Asia? And everybody had their own answers, but I've always remembered the answer you gave. You remember it?
Irrelevance.
Irrelevance. That's right. And that is very insightful and very powerful. This verse, and we've kind of gone off on a tangent here, but this verse reminds us that there's no such thing as irrelevance. We always have an important role, a responsibility that we never outgrow.
My youngest son is a grammar call. I mean, anytime I say something that he thinks I should say differently, not that what I'm saying is wrong, there's a better way of saying it. He's always telling me. And I get to this point saying, John, leave me alone.
That's hysterical. Good for him, because I'm the other way around. I'm always correcting my son's grammar, and he's reminding me that nobody cares about that stuff anymore.
My mom on her dying bed was correcting me on lie and lay.
Oh, yeah.
She was an English teacher, and she wanted to make sure I didn't forget that. Wilson has another thought. It has to do with when an older person dies, another library burns.
Yeah.
Oh.
So you can't get it back.
Some library birds. Just think about it. It's true. That wisdom.
Depressing.
Hard. But it's true. But all the more responsibility that is put on all of us.
Hopefully these little one paragraph read are good ways to learn these stories well enough that you can tell it to a kid and have them. Dave Hitt and I were having this, he had surgery, so we couldn't have this conversation over lunch hour. So how do you pass all this on to a 15-year-old kid like a sponge collecting this stuff? I said, I don't know how, it's so complicated, some of it. How do you put it in terms that they can understand? And then he sent me a text the next day and said, I think this is what we're talking about. And he sent me that Psalm 71 because it was in the forward magazine that morning. And so anyway, that it was just like one conversation hit right on another one. And I don't know. I don't have the answer for that. I think we need to do it, but
Yeah. Not easy. Something that every church is asking themselves right now. It's more and more our churches, whatever the tradition or denomination, we're getting old and gray headed. There are some mega churches that are more successful in bringing young people in. I've heard some people say, a lot of people will disparage some of those Bible churches. And you know what? If people are coming and hearing the word of God, I'm good with that. And hopefully, some of them will grow beyond that. Some of them won't. Some of them will continue to be fed by whatever they're receiving at some of these churches. I think some of them have what I might regard as questionable theology, but again, if they're in church together and they're in community with other Christians,
The alternative is worse, so.
Mhm.
I think we've told you about our daughter's church in Kansas, Adam Hamilton's church. Talk about a mega church.
Yeah. Wow.
They raise like $1 million just in plate offerings on Christmas Eve and Easter,
Wow.
which they give to charities all over Boston.
That's great.
But it's not my thing.
Right.
We love going there. I mean, when we go, Adam Hamilton is an incredible preacher. And it's uplifting and fun. And so far, all of Elizabeth's sons are still Christian, I think. So,
That's awesome. That's so great. Yeah.
There is a wonderful thing going on in Granite Shoals. The Fellowship Church that's on Phillips Ranch Road. Christ Redeemer Fellowship, I think is the full name of it. They're cooking Thanksgiving dinner on Thanksgiving.
Are they? Wow.
For the community, and they said for anyone who wants it, really. So that kind of keeps people who are shy about not having their food willing to come, because there will be some people there who probably could have made their own dinner.
If you have never been to an African-American Southern Baptist funeral service, you ought to go. It is an experience.
I bet. I don't think I've been to a funeral, so I've been to African American Baptist services, but not a funeral.
is it joyful and uplifting?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Good. To me, it was an incredible experience. I mean, you want to talk about people really getting into something, really feeling something, expressing it,
Yeah.
and it was.
Yeah. Great.
I like the piece at St. James Episcopal in Austin. You will get out there and how they hug every single person in the church. It's a long walk.
Right. That's right. Great place.
Who was the rector there that became I think a bishop up in the Northwest?
Greg Rickle.
Right.
Yeah.
I was in a session with him one time. He was amazing.
Great preacher, yeah.
Not as good as you, but
Oh, well, I'm not even in his class. He's very, very good. And his predecessor also was just, Bill Miller, was just another amazing, amazing preacher. He's now planning a church out of Round Top. He's got a little church plant out there. Speaking of church plants, I'll try to remember to mention this at the second service today, but the Episcopal Church of the Cross, which is down kind of in the Spicewood area, is having they have a new worship space. They've been worshiping school for a number of years now, and now they're getting their own space and they're dedicating it this afternoon, 4:00.
where is it?
I've not been to the new space, but it is basically at the corner of 71 and Bee Creek Road. So it's kind of in Spicewood proper to the degree that there is in Spicewood. So yeah, Bishop Ryan is going to be there, to bless and consecrate the new worship space. And so it's exciting. If I can stay awake that long, I'm going to try to go myself. Those are really our, other than Epiphany, I guess, they're our closest neighbors in the good folks for us to support.
As a movie here, I just want to say, like, throw out some thoughts, I guess. And then
Please do.
between Dave and Claire, we have two great.
All right, well, we better get to church. Next week, crucifixion.
No, I thought.
No, are we taking it right next week?
That's what I just read.
Is that Thanksgiving?
No,
It's the week.
it's some other. What's
Next
the-
week is Blue Christmas with the Labyrinth. On November, is that
That's on the
November 29th?
That's on the-
No, yeah, that's the 29th.
Does the bulletin say what we're?
Thanksgiving.
There was something.
This is say the date, okay, the 19th.
Yeah.
We have, and then the 26th is no class. Thanksgiving weekend and December 3rd is no class, the giving there.
So we do have class next.
That's
Is that right? Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
The 19th on the 19th.
All right.
Yeah, that's easy to.
That's funny. Huh. I wonder where we all read that. Hopefully we.
But
You know,
you know,
back to times.
it's all coming home.
Yeah, we can do that too. Yeah, I'd like to.
Well, I know
Here.
they're in smartphones on. Did you know some stuff? And it's very helpful. Sorry. You know, the background and all the stuff you know about, and then the way you call the discussion.
Well, thank you. It's a great discussion. I really appreciate it, and as I've said many times, to make sure we're able to engage relatively high level discussions. Trinity is because of-
Pick out one too.
Yeah.
Always walk.
Oh, wow. That's hilarious.
It's on Wednesday at 9:00. We just sit in here and do stuff just like we just did. We don't have. You don't have to like it, you just show up and you can sit.
I bet you would love it, and you would have a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good group. Yeah.
But you're welcome to show up if you want to.
Yeah, it's got in the Trinity, in the tidings, it has 19th, the path,